Hey everyone, welcome back to the Conversations with Adrian podcast. Today I'm joined by Daniel Roytas. Daniel, thank you so much for being on the show.
No worries, Adrian. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. We've been buddies on Facebook for a while now. Hey,
Yeah, we have quite a
yeah,
few years, and I've been seeing all the work that you've been doing, mate, and you've built quite a following, and it's good to see strong men like yourself also talking out against the nonsense.
thank you. And I've been admiring all of your work. I was just thinking today before we got on air that you're when you look at all your posts and things that you do on Facebook, which is great in terms of the information that you provide. But when you sort of look into you, my outside perspective looking in is you've got to dig fairly deep in order to find out exactly what you do. Like it's an interesting thing because you've got this persona online that's like speaking out against the narrative and all the stuff that's gone on the last few years. But then in more recent times, you've written books and you've got lectures and all this kind of stuff, which is sort of a journey of discovery for me. So I'd love to you to talk to that in terms of your journey to go from like where you were years ago, I guess, in university and studies and work and things like that, to now to a different point of view and different perspective and a different paradigm of the world. So if you could let us in on a bit of your journey, that'd be great.
Yeah, for sure. I guess I've kind of left my old life behind, so to speak. Uh, a lot of people go about their life trying to get educated and get lots of degrees and letters after their name, and then once they've got those qualifications and letters, they identify with that for the rest of their life. And they don't want to move away from being a XYZ, whatever it is, qualification that they've got. And I guess I've realized in the last few years that it's all nonsense. All those letters, all those degrees, all of that stuff has definitely helped me to get to where I am now. But I've basically left that all behind because I don't agree with basically 95% of what I've learnt
Hmm.
in all the qualifications and study and things that I've done. Or in the sort of 10 years that I spent. So I was a senior lecturer at a university in a natural medicine, naturopathic nutritional medicine program, yeah, for a decade. And thought that I was teaching the right stuff, the real stuff, helping students understand the body and health. And then I realized that actually what I was teaching was wrong and couldn't ethically teach what I was doing, teach what I was teaching.
Hmm.
And then decided to realign myself with trying to find the truth. So I guess now I'm more of an independent researcher rather than a XYZ practitioner, naturopath, nutritionist, whatever it is that, that label
Yeah.
would be. So yeah, that's sort of been my journey. I threw most of that away in 2020 when I heard some doctors talking or challenging this idea that germs cause illness. And this was actually something that I got taught about in my undergraduate degree
Is
way
that
back
right?
in 2006. And I dismissed it at the time because I thought it was proven. I thought that germ theory was a fact and that there was scientific evidence to support this idea. And when I heard them talking about this, it just rang true to me. Maybe because it's the truth, and maybe also because I'd heard it before. And I knew that if I was going to talk about this information, because obviously being a lecturer, I was doing presentations and lectures and all sorts of things all over the country for different associations, for different colleges, for different institutions. And I knew that if I was going to talk about this publicly, I better make sure that it's all correct and
Hmm.
accurate, dot my I's, cross my T's. So I started looking into it. And it didn't take me long to realize that what they were saying, I couldn't really fault them on it. And the rest is really history after that.
Wow. I definitely want to get into this germ theory, terrain theory type of conversation. I think that because your book, Can You Catch a Cold? Is that right? Is that what the title is?
That's right. Can you
Can you
catch a
catch a cold or
cold?
can you catch a flu?
Can you catch a cold?
Yeah, yeah. So it's been interesting because I know that I think I read on where was it? It must have been online somewhere where I think the forward was from Dr. Sam Bailey. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. And I've been following Sam and Mark for quite a long time. I interviewed Sam back in the throes of the pandemic and things like that. And at that time she was sort of talking about, germ theory and terrain theory, but it was almost like she wouldn't really go further into it at that time. She's like, if you really want to go down this sort of rabbit hole, then it's an interesting dynamic. So before we get into that though, I'm curious to know, when you say like, I learned about this, and then there was things to do with your lecturing and education, and you thought, um, it's wrong. What I'm teaching is the wrong thing. And I'd love for you to talk to how that sort of shaped you or formed an opinion as to whether you're going to take that leap. Because like you said, when you start talking about these things, you really got to, it's like this whole COVID nonsense. You've once you draw a line in the sand and you start to say, this is the side that I'm going to stand on, you really have to sort of like go at it with conviction, if you know what I mean. Like you don't want to sort of make that call and be wrong. So you got to really like stand your ground. So what was that process like for you in terms of putting your reputation on the line?
Well, I guess that's what everyone wants to keep intact, right? Is their reputation. And for me, the truth matters above all else. And I don't want to, the reason why I decided to do what I'm doing, to basically search for the truth, not just about germs, but about everything to do with health and wellness. What really makes you ill? What really makes us healthy? What do we need? What don't we need? That's a pursuit of the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And most people think that those things, finding that information is hard. Health is a mystery. Disease is a mysterious thing. We don't know what causes it. It's a germ, it's genetics, it's something unknown. And to achieve good health is really hard. But actually, the opposite is the truth. It's actually very easy and very simple. And we knew this information hundreds of years ago. It just got overshadowed by this prevailing theory that it's a germ or a gene or something else that causes illness.
Mm-hmm.
So our judgment was clouded, and we just became disconnected with that information that we've established and developed over hundreds, if not thousands of years. Now, when I was teaching, and even when I was a student, I would read textbooks and they would make statements in the textbooks, and then there would be a number after the statement, a little reference. And sometimes you would go and check that reference, that foundational evidence that's supporting that claim, but very seldom, because you don't have time. There's so much you're being taught and so much information you have to rote learn that you don't have time to go back and look at all these foundational claims to see if they hold water. Now, when I heard some doctors and scientists challenging this information, like these foundational concepts in the textbooks, I thought, well, I better go back and look at these references and make sure that the evidence that they're using here really does support the claims that are being made. And it didn't take me long to realize that these references that they're using don't support the claim. So the claim, like in relation to the book, Can You Catch a Cold, is that when sick people are in contact with healthy people get sick. And I went and looked for the foundational evidence for that. And not only did I find that there is none, actually the experiments that they did to try and prove this phenomenon proved the opposite. They
Really?
showed that you can't make someone sick by putting them in proximity with healthy people or sick people. So it blew that whole concept and theory out of the water. Now, that's obviously very confronting because we spend our whole life under this idea or under this impression that when you're around someone coughing and sneezing, they'll make you sick, they'll give you their illness. And we take that information forward with us for the rest of our life. Our parents, teachers, doctors, people in authority tell us this as children, and we believe it because one day there's someone who's coughing and sneezing, we're in close proximity to them, And then we get sick and we go, what mum and dad and the doctor told me must be true.
Confirmed.
And we never think about an alternative possibility because we've never been offered one. We've only ever been given this one story. And when I started looking into the real scientific evidence for this and the medical literature across the last 100 years, I found actually there's many alternative explanations as to why we might get sick. And I also found doctors throughout that period questioning the so-called evidence for this phenomena that we call contagion. So they were actually calling out all of these so-called scientific experiments back in the early 1900s,
Wow.
saying that they're not scientific because they're not controlled. They don't actually demonstrate what they're claiming. They aren't using natural modes of transmission. So in a lot of experiments, they weren't getting people to cough and sneeze on each other the way that we're told disease is transmitted. They were using unnatural methods of like injecting people with syringes of goop and stuff. And it doesn't have any like external validity, or it has no what's the word? It has no relevance to the real world, essentially, because we don't get sick by getting injected with someone's snot. So there's so many problems with all of this. And yeah, it didn't take me long to realize that the story we've been told is incorrect. And there are other plausible alternative explanations out there.
Wow. This is quite polarizing and confronting because, like you said before, like you're taught that you catch flu, colds, whatever, measles, mumps. I remember back in the day where one of the kids would have chicken pox, and then our parents would send us over to that child's place, and you'd have a measles and chicken pox party, and you want everyone to get it. So the trouble that I think a lot of people would have in terms of coming to terms with this no contagion type of theory is that there is a lot of confirmation that you can hang around sick people and get sick, and you can catch these things. So I remember Bruce Lipton said many years ago that all disease is inflammation in the body and things like that. So I understand fundamentally where you're coming from, but I still get challenged with the idea that viruses don't exist and contagion is not a thing, and because you do get sick, like, and you do have cohorts of people around you that are also getting sick. So can you maybe explain, I don't know, without sort of geeking out too much on the science side of things, but I think maybe interweaving into all of that is like explaining it to me like I'm a 5-year-old, but also at the same time using the evidence that you've come to learn as to explain why you've come to the realization or the theory that viruses don't exist. Because this, like I said, this sort of really throws in the face of, especially in the last 4 years, of everything that we've been thrown at us. Is like, well, this really changes the paradigm of the world, doesn't it?
Yeah. And look, this idea is relatively new, Adrian. We are led to believe that this has been an established fact for centuries, that we've known that germs and viruses and things cause illness. But actually, this is a very new concept, about 100 years old. And prior to that, doctors understood that it's our environment that we're exposed to, which is the key determining factor in what causes illness. And that was established since the time of Hippocrates, which was 500 AD, I think. So we're talking, 1,500, 2,000 years ago. They knew this. So that is the old knowledge that has been around for a very long time. It's just this new concept that is the new one. It's now the prevailing theory. And it should be a relatively easy process to show that when you put a sick person next to a healthy person, they get sick. That's the claim. It should be a really, really easy thing to do. You get a bunch of sick people, you get a bunch of healthy people, you put them in a room and you see what happens, right? It's not a hard thing.
Mm.
It's not rocket science. That is the claim. And scientists did that. Researchers did that. They couldn't make healthy people sick. They couldn't do it. So that in and of itself disproves this claim. And it wasn't just colds and flus that they did it with. They've done this with chicken pox and scarlet fever and whooping cough, all kinds of different conditions. So it's not just the cold and flu that they couldn't do this with.
Mm-hmm.
So this then begs the question, what is it possibly that makes people ill? Because you're right, people in the same location at the same time do seem to fall sick with the same symptoms one after another. And I'm not denying that.
Mm-hmm.
People definitely do fall sick. But there are other things people are exposed to which can cause symptoms of colds and flus and so-called infectious diseases that aren't viruses.
Okay.
So in my book, I covered over 200 experiments where they tried to do this and they couldn't do it.
Wow.
And I go through and I basically talk about all these experiments. I take really complex topics and simplify it right down so anyone can understand it. There's over, I think, nearly 1,400 references in the book. So yes, there's lots of science in the book or experiments, but it's not a sciencey book. Like anyone can pick it up and read it and go, oh, okay, I see what argument is being put forward here.
Yeah.
So if not a virus, then what?
Yeah.
That was your question. I give many, many examples in the book of instances where people fell sick at the same time with the same symptoms, one after the other, and a virus was not to blame. So one example of this was published in the medical literature in 2019, I think. And it was a young family, 3 siblings, 2 sisters and a brother, I think, were admitted to a emergency room in the States, I think it was, with symptoms diagnosed by the emergency room doctors as strep throat and scarlet fever.
Yep.
So a infectious, contagious childhood illness. And they basically gave them some antibiotics and said, go home, you'll be fine. Now, the children didn't get better. Within a few days, their symptoms got worse to the point where they were having difficulty walking. They had weakness. They were getting these weird neurological symptoms. They went back to another emergency room for a second opinion. And it turns out that the children were playing with a vial of mercury, which they dropped on the floor. It broke open. And those 3 children, when the mother came in, she vacuumed up the mercury, which vaporized the mercury into the air. And those 3 children were in the vicinity. They inhaled that mercury. They all got exposed to the same poison. And it presented, even in the paper, the doctors admit that it presented in a way that was indistinguishable from a common childhood illness. So mercury poisoning, mercury toxicity, was confused as a contagious disease, but it wasn't contagious. Those children were just exposed to the same environmental factors. And they even warn in this paper how doctors need to be on the lookout and make sure they're doing their due diligence to ensure that they're not misdiagnosing exposure to harmful substances like mercury for infectious diseases. Now, that's a problem because actually one of those children had permanent lasting damage.
Yeah.
And the reason that that's a problem is because they were looking at this through the lens of germ theory. That it must be a germ, and therefore the treatment that they got was delayed, and the treatment that they got was also inadequate and improper. They didn't receive the right treatment. So that led to permanent damage of that child. So this prevailing theory is not only incorrect, but it can also cause harm, that germs are the problem.
Yeah.
Now, this isn't the only example. I give many, many examples like this in the literature. In fact, there's this thing called mass psychogenic illness. There's over 60 documented cases of this happening throughout history, where people in groups fall ill with the same symptoms at the same time. No germ involved, no virus, no bacteria, no parasite, nothing. They don't know what the cause is. So one example of this is a phenomenon called the Tanganyika laughing epidemic, where children in Africa at a school started laughing uncontrollably and getting these weird and strange neurological symptoms. They felt like someone was chasing them. It was really quite disconcerting for them. But it
Yeah.
got to the point, it got so bad they closed the school down. And
Wow.
they sent those children back to their villages all around the local area. And as those children went back to their villages, the people in the villages started to get affected. They too developed these symptoms, laughing uncontrollably, feeling like someone's chasing them. So it started to spread. Yeah. It spread throughout a lot of, I think it was Tanzania. So it spread through a lot of that country and affected thousands of people over more than a year. But it wasn't a germ, it wasn't a virus, it wasn't a bacteria, it wasn't anything to do with that. It was what they define as mass psychogenic illness. So that there are other plausible explanations as to why people get sick at the same time, one after the other. And just because you see that happen, you can't immediately jump to this conclusion that it's a virus or a bacteria. You have to rule out all these other things first. And then if there's nothing else, maybe then you can investigate a germ. But that's not what they do.
Mm.
They jump to the germ conclusion first and then discount everything else. And that is a problem.
Okay, but can I just interject? So let's say you got an example of the mercury being dropped on the floor and it's vacuumed up and the vapors go through the air and they infect the children, right? So it's poisoning basically, which is the symptoms that the body was showing was a result of the poison from the mercury. Is that how I understand it? But if that's one way to rationalize or what exactly happens, but what about when, like, just in terms of seasons, you have seasons where, people get the flu and they get cold and flu symptoms all the time. You look at, say, COVID, for example. I mean, look, I come from the perspective that I don't think COVID was ever a thing. I just think that um, you were just told that there was a big bad boogeyman out there and everyone got worried sick. That's how I think. And I also think that everything that we're seeing now is just vaccine injuries and repercussions of shedding and all those sorts of stuff. But in saying that, I do give weight to that. If you have measles, there's a physical symptom of it, and then other people get measles, right? So they get the same symptoms and the same ailments as what someone else. So then it has a name. So I'm not sure what I'm trying to get at, but I'm just thinking, like, surely, can you hear my dog snoring from the background?
No.
She's snoring so loud. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, it doesn't discount that there are viruses or illnesses or symptoms of illness that arise, and they're called a thing like strep throat, meningococcal, like whatever it may be, and that sort of has weight as well. Like, how do you disprove that that's actually a thing, or how do you rationalize that it's from something else because the doctor didn't ask enough questions as to what happened prior to everyone getting, you would have thousands, hundreds of thousands of cases of people getting flu-like symptoms during the winter. So surely they all don't have mercury being spilt in their lounge rooms at the same time. But how do you answer questions like that?
Yeah. The people making the positive claim, so the mainstream, claim that it's a germ, that it's a virus. So the onus is on them to prove that that is the case. And they haven't done that, not through any scientific experiment. And certainly through no empirical study. By doing what they claim causes the problem, is being in close proximity to sick people. They haven't demonstrated that
Mm-hmm.
But you're right, there are people in great numbers who get sick, say like flu season, for example. How do we explain this? Now, I'm only putting forward alternative hypotheses here. I'm not making positive claims. I'm just saying, hey, look, there are other things that can make people get sick with colds and flus, and maybe we should look at these things in more detail rather than jumping to this erroneous conclusion that it's a germ. So one thing that people may be interested to know is that governments and health departments around the world can actually predict the onset of a cold and flu pandemic with great certainty within a month of there being a change in humidity and temperature. So when the humidity in the atmosphere falls below a certain threshold, within a month, an outbreak will happen.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how does this actually work? Well, they say that it's when there's a change in humidity, there's more virus particles in the air, and it makes your respiratory tract more susceptible to these viruses floating through the air. But there are other ways in which changes in humidity, which would affect a large group of people living in a particular area, above and beyond that of a virus. So we are constantly breathing in pollution in the air. So particulate matter coming from factories and tire dust from cars, exhaust fumes, brake dust, all sorts of things. Even naturally occurring compounds like ozone and nitrous acid and sulfurous acid, all of these particulates in the atmosphere increase and decrease in response to changes in humidity and temperature. I'll give an example of what happened in China in late 2019, because the outbreak there happened in early 2020.
Mm-hmm.
So late 2019, when there's a lot of pollution in places like China, air pollution, and as the sun heats up the earth, the layer of air closest to the ground heats up and hot air rises up. Yeah, so it usually takes away that pollution away from the cities, and it reduces the air pollution quality index, which we are told that level should be no more than 5 micrograms per cubic meter. Let's just call it 5 parts per million. This is the acceptable, allowable limit of air quality, 5 parts per million. There's a thing called a temperature inversion that happens when there's a change in humidity. And that basically puts a layer of cool air over the top of that layer of hot air and traps it closer towards the ground. So rather than that pollution being taken away, it traps it close to the ground. And this happened in the areas where COVID-19 supposedly broke out in early 2020. This happened in late 2019, about a month before the first cases started being reported. Mm-hmm. Now, that temperature inversion caused an increase in air pollution to 700 parts per million.
Wow.
700 parts per million. So this is like orders of magnitude more than the total safe allowable limit of particulate matter in the air. And mind you, particulate matter is one of the most harmful substances to people. It is air pollution causes more deaths. It causes 12 million deaths per year. Cancer worldwide causes about 9 million deaths. Flu causes about 600,000 deaths a year. So air pollution is almost the leading cause of death around the world.
Wow.
Now, our lungs, our respiratory tract are constantly clearing this stuff out. We've got these little brooms inside our respiratory tract called cilia. They're like little finger-like projections, and they basically sweep this inhaled debris up and out of our lungs. Mm-hmm. Keeps our respiratory tract clean. And we've also got mucus in our lungs, so it traps the particles, and then the brooms basically sweep it out, and then we either swallow it or we cough it out or blow it out of our nose. We have stuff trapped in this in the mucus. When there's changes in humidity and temperature, that process gets inhibited. It stops. This is well known. So now, if you're in an area where there's heavily polluted air, the body can't clear that stuff out because it's been inhibited by a natural meteorological atmospheric change in temperature and humidity. So the body has to try another way to clear this stuff out of the lungs because it's incredibly harmful to the body. So how does it do that? It releases certain chemicals in the body that cause the lining of the respiratory tract to basically slough off. The lining of the respiratory tract falls away. And these inflammatory chemicals that are released by the body cause coughing, sneezing, mucus production. You're basically clearing that stuff out because the normal process of the body has been impaired. And we call this a cold or a flu.
Mm-hmm.
This is well known. This is well established in the literature. This isn't just like something I've made up. So this explanation could be one reason why we see seasonal things like colds and flus, for example. Again, no pathogen required, no germ required.
Wow. So would it be fair to say that okay, so if contagion is not a thing, but you have this blanket-like approach in terms of atmospheric change or a temperature change and the environment that people are in one particular area. So you're saying it's not crossing from person to person, it's that in a concentrated area, everyone is in the same environment, so everyone is experiencing the same respiratory symptoms at the same time. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yep. And look, there may be people who get sick and others who don't, or someone's illness is worse than someone else's. And we would say, well, that's due to immunity. I didn't get sick because I'm immune.
Mm-hmm.
There are theories in the literature that people who have cleaner respiratory tracts, so people who have been supporting their body's natural ability to keep the respiratory tract clean by eating good food, exercising, not drinking alcohol, not smoking, doing all other sort of health promoting activities, their respiratory tract is cleaner.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So when this change in humidity happens and people are exposed to more air pollution, the people who have more exposure to pollution, who have been eating shit, not drinking enough water, drinking alcohol, smoking, doing all these other things, which have impaired their body's capacity to clean out or clean house regularly, well, now they're going to have an extra burden or an extra load. So their body's going to have to clean house. Yeah. Whereas people whose house is clean because they've been doing all the right things, they get exposed to this heightened level of air pollution, and either they don't get as sick or they don't get sick at all because the body's not overburdened. Now, we've mistaken that for immunity when it's not necessarily immunity at all. I will also say something else in relation to seeing someone get sick around a sick person, a healthy person falling sick when they come in close contact with a sick person. There are experiments where they've exposed people to saline, just salt water. And they've said to these people, we're exposing you to a germ, but they didn't expose them to a germ. The person's mind, their power of belief made them sick. So in these experiments, they get exposed to salt water. That night, they're up coughing and shivering and sneezing and spluttering. And the next morning, the doctors come in and go, gotcha. We didn't expose you to a germ. We gave you saline. And within an hour, they're better. Now, that power of their mind alone was enough to cause the symptoms of a cold or flu. So what happens when, for your entire life, you're told that when you come in contact with someone who coughs and sneezes, you're also going to get sick? You believe this, yeah? So when you come in contact with someone who's coughing and sneezing, is it possible that you manifest those symptoms through the power of your mind? Even in the book, I talk about other instances where people have manifested even worse signs and symptoms and colds and flus. They've done experiments where they've said to people, we're giving you chemotherapy. And they didn't give them chemotherapy, they gave them saline, yet they got all the side effects of chemotherapy. Their hair fell out, they got nausea and vomiting and weakness and all these other kinds of symptoms that we would associate with chemotherapy. So if the power of the mind is great enough to make your own hair fall out and develop symptoms of chemotherapy exposure, why not a simple sneeze or a cough or a sniffle? There's so much more to this than we've ever been told about. And I'm sure if people were given all of these different explanations as children, it's like, hey, look, there's 10 prevailing ideas about why we get sick, and a germ is one of them. Would we be so bound to this idea that we couldn't accept anything else as a possibility? Maybe, maybe not.
Look, I think, when you hear about tests and studies and they say we had a control group where they got given a red pill and then the other group got given a blue pill, and the blue pill was sugar, or it was nothing. So the placebo group, they say in the group that took the pill, they experienced this result, but the placebo group also experienced a result. And it's almost like very underplayed that the placebo group had an experience that was mimicking what the pill was doing. It's the same in exercise. I think Dennis Waitley, I was listening to, this is giving away my age, but like I listened to a cassette series of Dennis Waitley, and he said that he had these athletes just rehearse in their minds running through the events, and they all performed with better lifts, bigger, stronger lifts, and faster times. And they had people just pretend in their mind or visualize in their mind exercising, and their biceps grew bigger just by visualizing this whole thing. So I definitely give huge weight to the power of the mind. My work is largely around changing your mindset and the perception of the way life's treated you in so many ways, and what your parents did and how you think and behave and all that kind of stuff. So I get all of that. I just think that maybe you can give me your opinion, because I'll give you an example that actually relates to Sam Bailey we were talking about before. I've interviewed so many doctors around the world since this pandemic started. Like I say this a lot, so I sound like a broken record, but I went out on the limb saying I think this is a false flag, because I'd been exposed to some of the propaganda and the goings on in the financial industry and all those sorts of things. So I just thought this was very similar process to propagandizing this whole, like, the world's going to fall and scaring people to death and all that kind of jazz, right? Probably like yourself, I stuck my neck out, got smashed straight away. Everyone just thought, you're a conspiracy theorist, get out of town, you're danger to my grandmother and all that sort of stuff that was going on. So I thought to myself, I'll just go and interview other people, because I was already interviewing business people anyway. And I thought I'd just go and interview other people about the virus and about what's going on. And so I talked to Peter McCullough, and I talked to Pierre Corey, for example, and Roger Hodgkinson, and like all of these doctors around the world that were giving me at least the impression that it wasn't what the health officials were saying and the governments were saying, and that there was solutions to this problem, like ivermectin and all these sort of protocols and things like that. But the reason why I mention all of that is because I recently interviewed in the last couple of months Peter McCullough again, and one of the people that come online and said, look, this guy's just telling lies because he doesn't understand germ theory, and he doesn't understand that what he's promoting is false, and he's pushing the pharmaceutical industry. And then they sent me a video from Sam Bailey. It was about the follies of Peter McCullough. And I had a few comments to say, and I believe I know it got back to Sam, because I've asked her to come back on the show, and she's like, did you say all these things about me? Because one of these people sent all of that information to her. And this is what it basically was. I said, I think it's in poor taste that you can go out and say everyone else is wrong because germ theory is not proven and viruses don't exist, and they're doing the wrong thing by others by saying that. And that's the reason why I mention that, is because this would fly in the face of 99.9% of doctors and practitioners around the world. I mean, the only people that would probably be singing from the same hymn book as you that are practicing in terms of like health professionals would even be like, most naturopaths probably wouldn't think this way. Would you agree? Like, how many people are kind of swaying towards this and I guess advocating for the fact that to improve your health is the best defense against any kind of bug or germ or whatever that's going around. Can you talk to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll come back to the same point I always come back to. You have to look at the foundational evidence to support the claim. That evidence isn't there. There are no double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trials, none, not a single one that's ever been published in the literature showing a germ causes disease. There's not a single double-blind, randomized, even a single-blind placebo-controlled trial showing that when you put a sick person in contact with a healthy person, that they become ill. Now, if there are doctors and people out there saying that this does happen, what we're asking for is to see the evidence. Just show us. It should be a really simple thing to do, considering that germ theory is the prevailing theory and that it's so widely accepted. It should be really easy to go, oh, look, here's the study, Dan. They got a bunch of sick people, put them in contact with healthy people, and they made them sick. There was the Common Cold Research Unit, which was developed after World War II in the United Kingdom, in Britain. And the field hospital there was donated to the United Kingdom government by the Americans. And they turned it into, it was this, it was a infectious disease hospital that they were using during World War II to investigate outbreaks and things. They turned that into the Common Cold Research Unit. And for decades, they tried to do these experiments. They did one experiment where they sent a bunch of people out into the Hebrides, into the islands there that were deserted. And they put a bunch of healthy people there for 3 months. They came in contact with no one else who was sick. They then sent a bunch of sick people to the island to live with them and interact with them in every way imaginable. No one got sick. They couldn't make people ill. They could never demonstrate that it was a germ that was the cause of the problem. They could never demonstrate that there was this phenomena called contagion. So if there's doctors and people out there saying that it happens, just show the evidence. It shouldn't be that hard to do it. And I guess that's what we're really asking for here, is to see that foundational evidence. Now, one really interesting thing is before the germ theory came out, we're talking late 1800s here, 95%, maybe even more, of the entire medical profession was in agreement that disease wasn't contagious and that germs and bacteria didn't cause disease. 95% of the medical profession. So we're talking 1860s here. I've got documents that are showing some of the leaders in the profession saying, we're ready to throw germ theory out, because they were actually looking at various different so-called infectious contagious diseases, like yellow fever, for example, which we now know isn't a contagious illness. It's supposedly caused by mosquitoes. They disproved that was a contagious illness because they believed that it was. They were disproving all of these different contagious illnesses and saying, none of them are contagious. We're wrong. There's something else going on here. And then a few years later, Pasteur releases the germ theory, and the medical profession is staunchly opposed to it. They fight tooth and nail to try and disprove it. But there are obviously reasons why, and I won't go into why, but there are obviously reasons why that got pushed on the medical profession. And slowly over time, it became this accepted thing. So yeah, all we're asking for is a foundational evidence. When you look back through history, there's a very different story as to what we were told. When we go and get our training in colleges, universities, in health, we're told that story. but we're never given the evidence to evaluate for ourselves as to whether or not there is any proof of these things.
Mm,
And I will certainly change my position on this. I'm not hard and fixed in any way of thinking. All I ask for is that evidence.
really?
So it hasn't been shown, it hasn't been put forward after 4 years of us asking for it, many, many dozens of doctors and hundreds of scientists asking for this information. Shouldn't be a hard thing to provide. And
Mm,
in fact, Adrian, when I was writing this book, I wanted to make sure that I was putting forward correct and true information. And people say to me, what do you know? You're not a virologist. Well, I went and I connected with a virologist and a microbiologist, and I got them to act as a subject matter expert and to review and critique and edit the book for me, along with a range of other medical doctors behind the scenes looking at all of this independently. I just went forward and said, here's what I'm doing. Will you look at this for me? And they couldn't fault it. They said, you're right. We don't have the evidence for it. We don't have the proof for it. So, like, there are, and obviously those people don't want to come forward and put their name to this, right? Because it would be professional suicide for them.
yeah.
But there are people out there who know that we don't have the evidence for it. It's just the prevailing accepted theory, and therefore we run with it. And if you don't have the balls and the guts to push back against it, then you just sit there and toe the line, or you shut up and just do nothing.
Mm.
So, I mean, yeah, that's the crux of the matter. Is just show the evidence, show the paper. Shouldn't be a hard thing to do.
Look, I mean, as you say that, I think in terms of what was the time period, late 1800s, when they were going to throw out germ theory? Is that what you're saying?
1860, New York. I think it was the New York Academy of Medicine.
Which in my mind lines up with a story that I heard about, I think it was the Rockefellers. They were kind of like, they were getting bombarded with a lawsuit. I think that threw them out of the oil industry, or something of that nature, because they had a monopoly on that. So then they were looking at using petroleum and making medicine out of petroleum, and that seems like it lines up timeline wise with throwing out or keeping germ theory as opposed to throwing it out, because then you've got loads of medicines that you can make as a result of the symptoms of disease and things like that. So that makes sense. But if you go back even further in time, what about, like, how would you explain where there's literature that says, I don't know, for example, the Mayans or the Aztecs or whatever, they were indigenous tribes, white men come along, infiltrated their countries, loads of disease, sexually transmitted diseases, and all that kind of stuff, flew about, and flus and all those sorts of things, and wiped out colonies and things like that. So, are you saying or suggesting that perhaps that's been manipulated in a way to sort of tell a story that wasn't exactly true, or do you think that that's an accurate depiction of the past?
Yeah, so there's 2 points there that I'll cover off on. So the first one was around that time, there were other things happening which may have influenced this information, or this idea that germs cause disease came out.
Mm-hmm.
Now, around that same time, plastic was being developed. Pesticides were being developed. The way that food was being grown was moving away from the way that we'd grown it forever to this way of monocrop farming. Now, could those things be rolled out and used across society, and people accept the use of plastics and pesticides and other things? Would they accept the use of these things if they knew they were making them sick? No, no way. There's no chance. People would push back against that. But when people did start getting sick from, I would argue, from those things, from their environment being poisoned and polluted and their food being adulterated, you need a scapegoat, right? So why not use a germ? Why not say, oh, see these things, this microscopic thing here, that's the problem. It's not the pesticides we're spraying on your food. It's not the plastics that's now contaminating the environment. I think now there's so much plastic in the environment, so much microplastic, that we essentially ingest a credit card sized piece of plastic every single week.
Mm.
Every single week, you're eating a credit card sized piece of plastic.
Months.
Now, imagine if you took your dog to the vet and he was munging on a piece of plastic like that every week and he was getting sick. And you took him to the vet and the vet goes, "Oh, yeah, it's this. I've taken this sample. So there's little bacteria here. That's the problem."
Mm.
And you say to the vet, "Hank, would it be because he's been eating a piece of plastic every week?" "Oh, no, nothing to do with that. Don't, no, not a problem. It's this germ over here." I think it's a diversion tactic, right? It
Mm.
was invented, the theory was invented to act as a red herring to divert your attention away from the true causes of disease. So that's the first point. And the second point is, what about explorers and things and people who went to these pure colonies of like Mayans or the Aztecs or whatever, or the Native American Indians or the Aborigines in Australia, or the indigenous, I should say. There are other things that may have been making them ill. So first, you come and disrupt their way of life. You oppress them. You put them in chains. Yeah. You mess with their way of life. You mess with their food supply. You introduce things that have never been there before, ever, right?
Mhm.
Uh, so yeah, you wipe out a lot of people with war. You create famines. You starve people. You do all sorts of things, and you say, how are we going to explain this away? Let's just say a germ got them. Let's just say it was a contagious illness. The white man brought a contagious disease to the natives. Well, how come it didn't work the other way? How come the white man didn't get wiped out by the tropical pathogens that were lurking in the jungles,
Mm.
right? It only ever seemed to go one way, which is really peculiar, because germ theory doesn't discriminate, or it shouldn't discriminate, I should say.
Mm.
Doesn't matter who you are, the germ will get you. So
Fair point.
like that's a big issue that it never seemed to kill off the white folk who were devastating the locals and natives there.
Mm. Yeah, very interesting. So within your line of work now, am I interpreting correctly that you're educating people on how to improve their system so you've got the best fighting chance of being able to, I guess, combat the things that are in our environment all the time? So that's probably part one of what you do. We are always exposed to pollution, toxicity, things within our soil. I mean, contaminants in our water. Like there's so many things that are like our body's fighting against every single day. So the first step seems like just preparing this vessel that we, the meat suit that we carry ourselves around in, to be in its best fighting state in order to protect itself against anything that comes along. And I think what's really fascinating about adapting this mindset of germs, germ theory is not a thing, contagion is not a thing, viruses don't exist, that alleviates a lot of stress and pressure on being around sick people, going into certain environments, like if it's too hot or it's too cold or a different part of the country or whatever it may be. It's a paradigm shift. All of a sudden, like the mindset shift to saying, I'm feeling like I've got a scratchy throat or I've got a heavy chest, I'm wheezing, is just my body doing its thing, versus I'm going to get super sick. And if I don't knock this on the head now, it's going to get even worse, which is quite a shift from, oh, my body's just clearing toxins and mucus and particulates from the air that's been inhibiting me from breathing properly. Now I'm going to go to medicines, foods, all that kind of stuff to kind of protect myself and improve my body's well-being. Have I got that right?
Yeah, essentially, the symptoms are the cure, Adrian. The symptoms are the cure. The symptoms are the answer to the problem. They are not the cause of the problem. So the damage to the body comes first and then the body responds. So we've been led to believe that disease is the symptoms, which it's not. Think about if you get a splinter in your finger, what happens? It gets red, it gets swollen, it gets inflamed, you get pus, you get pain, you get all of these things. They're the symptoms. Why are you getting the symptoms? Well, because I got the splinter in the finger. The splinter is the cause. That response by the body, that inflammatory response, is the body trying to push that splinter out of the finger. And to alert you, pain is to alert you that it's there. It's no different from anything else. That analogy is no different to any other disease. You have to find the splinter and pull it out, and then the problems go away. And if you don't pull it out, the body will do it for you. Now, the problem is that a lot of these things that we're being exposed to in nature, the body can't get rid of. They're called persistent organic pollutants. And they get trapped inside the body, and then the body's in this constant state of trying to remove the splinter. So you go into this chronic inflammatory state, which is the body's attempt to clear the problem and heal the tissue. So we've just been confused about what disease is. Disease, there is a cause that happens and we usually don't see what that cause is. It's a silent thing. It's eating plastic every week and drinking polluted water and eating food that's been sprayed with poison and consuming heavily processed and refined food that depletes us nutritionally. It's being stressed chronically in working and living in a sick Western society. It's not sleeping properly. It's working in offices and not getting enough exposure to sunlight and fresh air and getting outside in nature and putting your feet on the ground. It's not doing enough exercise. It's not doing enough. It's not drinking enough clean water. These are the reasons why people get sick. You're being poisoned, you're toxic, you're not giving the body what it needs to eliminate those poisons and toxins. And then you're also not giving the body the essential things it needs to sustain itself, which are those things I mentioned: healthy food, clean air, fresh water, exercise, love, sleep, rest, trying to minimize your stress.
Yeah.
If we think about it, like, I'll draw an analogy between us and a plant. A plant needs certain things to live and survive. It needs water. It needs healthy soil. It needs sunlight. It needs fresh air. It needs food in the soil. It needs other plants around it. It needs companionship. If the plant wasn't getting, say, 2 or 3 of those things, what would happen to it? It would start to die. Would you come along and say, oh, look at all the black spots and all the brown leaves on this plant? Must be infected by something. We better give it some antibiotics. Or we better give it a drug. We better pump it full of anti-inflammatories. Of course you wouldn't. You'd look at it and go, man, this plant hasn't been watered in 3 weeks. Give it some damn water, right? Oh, look, it's you planted it underneath some shade. It's in a pergola. It's not getting enough sunlight. This is a full sun plant. Put it out in the sun. Give it water, give it sun. You've got it in a pot in some sandy loam, and it actually requires a different type of soil. Put it in the right soil. Oh, now I've done that, the plant gets better. You didn't need a drug. You didn't need a surgery or an intervention to make that plant better. So until such time as you give that plant exactly what it needs, it's not going to thrive. Same as a human being. If you're not doing all of those things most of the time, you're going to get sick. So if you're not getting enough sun, if you're not moving your body and you're eating crap every day and you're sick, what you have to do is go and address those things, and then the body will take care of itself. But if you're not doing those things and you're ill, you can't go, oh, gee, it's XYZ, it's a germ, it's something my body's doing wrong, it's this unknown thing, it's my genes, it's whatever. You have to address the fundamentals first, then get out of the way, see what the body's capable of doing. And then if there's some residual stuff left over, then maybe we can do some more serious interventions. But as it stands, I would guarantee that most people aren't getting the essential things that they need to survive. And they're also being exposed to poisons and toxins. I mean, this stuff is everywhere. And the reason why people don't focus on the true cause of the problem is because it's too convenient to blame an invisible enemy. Oh, it's something in the air that got me. It's because my dad had it. That's the reason why I'm sick. It shifts the blame away from the true underlying causes. And if we don't address those underlying causes, we'll just live or have to try and live with those things into perpetuity forever. And there's no way that we can survive as a human race and the environment can survive by doing these practices, which are essentially killing us, killing plants, killing animals, and destroying the environment in which we live.
Mm. It's interesting you say that because like it's also maybe it's just a human need that we need to give something a reason or a purpose, and that's the explanation. It can't be ambiguous. It can't be just something that we can sort of like it's inexplainable. It needs an explanation, and maybe that's just why it's an easy go-to in terms of this is the cause, this is the the explanation as to why I'm feeling or thinking or acting a certain way. So it's kind of like a human need to find out the answer. It can't be sort of left out there in the wilderness to be an unknown. So I think in wrapping up, I'd like to know where does medical intervention play in your mind? Like what role does it play? Because it sounds like what I'm hearing from you is that if everyone followed your advice of improving this vessel to the point where they're eating the right things, they're in a less toxic environments, they're mitigating those exposures, they're in a loving relationship, they love themselves, they have a mindset that is conducive to being happy and harmonious and living congruently with, I don't know, their values, their belief systems, and all those sorts of things, then it sounds like, I don't know, maybe 80% of medical intervention wouldn't be required. It'd make make a lot of GPs and a lot of doctors very bored for a while. I don't think a lot of people would be seeing them.
Um, Something that you might be able to relate to, Adrian, is in the documents from the first fleet that came to Australia, they documented that the indigenous, the natives, were in a state of complete health. There was no disease, none. And this isn't unique to the Australians. This is written by anthropologists and explorers throughout history when they visited native tribes. So disease is a consequence of a sick, broken Western society. Disease is a consequence of living in disharmony with nature. So the closer you live to harmony with nature, the less disease that you have. So what that means is we don't require the overwhelming majority of interventions to treat disease. And when you think about it, disease is the answer to the problem. So when you're coming along and focusing on the symptoms, you're just suppressing them. So you're suppressing the body's natural capacity to heal itself, which is a big issue. And this is what most of mainstream modern medicine focuses on, even natural medicine now to an ever-growing extent. They're focusing on suppressing symptoms rather than addressing the underlying cause. So if that is the case, if disease is a consequence of a sick, broken Western society, what role does medicine have? Well, I would say in acute care settings. So think of all the reasons why a native person might need healthcare if there are no diseases, if there's no diabetes, if there's no cardiovascular disease, if there's no cancer, if there's no obesity, if there's no depression. What would they need it for? Well, maybe they're out hunting and they fall off a cliff and they break their leg. Medicine would come in handy then. Maybe you fall and you get a massive cut on your leg and it's an arterial bleed. You want a surgeon to come along and just sew that wound shut. Maybe there's a complication with pregnancy and there's some internal hemorrhaging going on. yeah, maybe it would be a great idea to have an OBGYN on hand to make sure that problem is dealt with. So acute medicine is really, really important. Um, Emergency care is really, really important. I think that without those things, life would be a lot harder. But what I'm really concerned about is the growing rates of chronic disease, despite the fact that we're supposedly having access to the best medical care the world has ever seen. There's never been a time before where we've had better medicine. Yet for some odd reason, there's never been more chronic disease than there is today.
Agreed.
So something's not right there. Um, so yeah, once we understand that really we need to clean up our act, we need to clean up the world that we're living in, and we need to be more active, get outside, breathe fresh air, be happier, get love, have purpose in life, eat fresh food, stop spraying your food with poison. And then if you fall and break your leg accidentally, have the medicine there to deal with that. I think we're going to be in a much better position.
Agreed. 100%. Yeah, very good. Where can people go to find out more about you and read your book, buy your book, and all those sorts of things?
Yeah, they can just go to my website, www.humanly.com, Humanley. I also just want to say that the book isn't trying to tell people what to think. It's just getting people to think, simply providing alternative theories about why we might get sick, what illness is, what some of those underlying mechanisms or forgotten mechanisms might be. Just presenting the information as it stands, and allowing people to make up their own mind.
I like that. Look, I want to commend you on your work. I think I listened recently as I reached out to you when you were being interviewed by Tom Cowan. I think that like the way you presented yourself was excellent. You were very articulate, and as you have been in this podcast, and explaining your position in not such a way of like it's a matter of fact or you're stupid for not thinking the way I think, and you're not sort of giggling or like smirking at others because they are of an old paradigm or a different belief system. And I think that's commendable. It's something that I've tried to do as much as possible throughout this COVID pandemic because I don't I think I can say hand on heart, I've never called anyone a sheeple or anything like that. And yeah, there've probably been many moments where I've been very angry and frustrated with how people think. But I think it's commendable for someone like yourself with the credentials that you have and the knowledge that you have to, I guess, portray your views in such a way that is quite diplomatic and it allows people to think for themselves. And all you're doing is giving factual based evidence to say maybe there's another way of thinking of things. So I really appreciate that. And I think that there's a lot to be said for people like you who have a similar approach without, I guess, putting anyone else down in the process. Would you agree?
Yeah, we're all on the same side here, Adrian. Every single human being is. There's been so much division that's been created to divide us into smaller and smaller and smaller groups. And that I won't talk to you because you don't think the way that I'm talking, or you think this, or you do that. And we just divide ourselves and we become weak when we're divided. So we have to come together and we have to become strong, because I think there's far more insidious and greater threats out there than the division or the differences of opinion that we have with our fellow men.
So true.
So I care about humanity. I care about the health of people. I care about this world. I care about the environment. And even if I am off the mark with all of these things, and as I said, I'm happy to be shown where I am wrong. Even if I'm off the mark, it doesn't negate the fact that we need to stop poisoning and polluting the world that we live in, stop poisoning and polluting our bodies, and stop thinking toxic thoughts that serve no one, not ourselves, not our fellow friends, our family. And really just to learn and understand that getting back to basics will help to fix a lot of these issues. I don't think it's rocket science. I don't think the problem is any more. The problem isn't unachievable. It's within our reach to change these things. We just have to come together and work towards solving them as a common good.
Yeah. Amen. Daniel, I really appreciate your time. Thanks again for everything that you do. I am super grateful, and I always read your posts and just wanted to congratulate you again on your success, and particularly, and I hope this book is a great success for you. I think that it's definitely some work that I want to get into and learn more about. So you've opened my eyes to new ways of thinking. So I appreciate that. Hey, we should catch up sometime if you're in New South Wales, or if you want to get together at some point. I think it'd be great to meet you in person, and I look forward to circling back and chatting with you again soon.
Thanks so much for your hospitality, Adrian. I really enjoyed chatting with you, and I'd love to catch up sometime.
Sounds great. Okay, mate. Talk soon.
Thanks.